You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. And you mentioned the time frame and the timeline that this civilization could have existed. Let's start there. How far back should we be going when we're talking about the onset of the Atlantis civilization?
It's a great question, and it's always one that I have to preface with, I can't make that claim. The oldest, let's say, written record, if you will, would be, say, there are some pre-Platonic sources from India. There's the Egyptians' King's List, the Turin King's List, that mention a pre-9000 BC timeline that stretches back potentially millennia. But the clearest case of when it started and how it, over multiple iterations, was destroyed, because in my investigation, I identified 3 destructions of a once much larger continent-sized landmass in the Atlantic Ocean, that by the time Plato got the story was whittled down to 3 small islands. But the first iteration, according to, say, Edgar Cayce, who gave 500 readings on Atlantis, was somewhere around, as incredible as it seems, 100,000 BC, when he claims there was pretty much a large continent where the mid-Atlantic ridge is today, that stretched roughly from the Gulf of Mexico to where the Azores are. And that was destroyed, according to Cayce, in a very specific date at 50,722 BC. That's the date he put. Turned into 5 large islands, one of which would be where the Sargasso Sea is, but still kind of subcontinental islands. The second destruction he identified at 28,000 BC, and the final one sometime around 10,000 BC, which is in accord with Plato, when the final 3 islands were submerged or destroyed in a comet impact. Now, what was going on at 100,000 BC? I don't claim to know. I've read all the Cayce readings in this particular case, and he identifies basically a quite primitive group of people who are just trying to figure things out. But given enough time, in each of these 3 iterations, they all kind of go through their own, you're talking 20,000 plus year time spans. Think about how far we've come in, let's say, 7,000 years. They all basically get to or beyond our current technological limit. And in the first 2 destructions, and I'll leave that to readers of the book to find, because they're quite interesting, those were human caused. The third was natural and kind of global, whereas the first 2 were local but catastrophic because of the technology malfunction. He focused really, because Edgar Cayce, for people that don't know, was a turn of the century and really active in the 20s and 30s clairvoyant, who could put himself in a hypnagogic trance and was, as I mentioned, studied and has affidavits, it's not my opinion, and was fortunate enough to have a stenographer with him during every of his 15,000 readings, 500 of which dealt with people's past lives in various parts of the world, but Atlantis being one of them. And he didn't give these readings for fun. He gave these readings to help people evolve emotionally and spiritually. As a Christian, he thought that, look, if you know what you did in your past life in Atlantis or Rome or the time of Jesus, you can kind of avoid that in this life and grow from that. And it might help explain some of your proclivities and struggles. And so a lot of the people he, got as clients, he put at the 3rd destruction, which was the kind of final battle. And it's fascinating, Chris, the parallels between the 3rd iteration of Atlantis and Star Wars. Because I talk about that in the book, that I have no evidence that George Lucas and his writers were influenced by the Edgar Cayce stories of Atlantis or the Frederick Oliver stories. But it's unbelievable how similar the 2 are. And that got me thinking that perhaps it really is some sort of like Jungian collective consciousness that comes out in fiction, and we call it Star Wars. But I always tell people, remember, the premise of Star Wars is not the future, it's a long time ago.
Yes.
Right. So I wonder about that, really legitimately, you know, that in Cayce's account, instead of the Sith and the Emperor, it's the sons of Belial and their leader. And instead of the Jedi, it's the children of the Law of One. But they function identically. And this is 40 years before the franchise was created. And then in Frederick Oliver's account from 1881, he's talking about, I'm on a ship. I'm on an aluminum cigar-shaped ship that can go in the water and through the air without flight surfaces. And I'm speaking to my girlfriend, who's a princess, through a holographic mirror, as he describes it in his 1881 language. And you're thinking, this is Star Wars. They're describing it, but where is he getting this imagery? You know, he's living in 1881. Where is he getting imagery of cigar-shaped aluminum flying craft and holographic projectors and crystals that power the island? And I find it very difficult to explain, and people say, well, it's just fiction. And it's like, well, why didn't he publish it in his lifetime?
Yeah, that's a good
question. He didn't make any money. His family didn't understand what was going on. They expressed great interest, like, why are you going to your bedroom every night instead of, you know, having dinner with us, and writing this book backwards in his own admission. He says parts of it were written backwards, parts of it were written out of order. I lost my friends. I thought I was going crazy, but I was told to do this by this occult preceptor in the shadow of Mount Shasta, which is, you know, a sacred site that many people have identified as a strange, you know, kind of place, strange energy around Mount Shasta. And he was writing in the shadow of Mount Shasta. So it's like, I don't know, you know, I'm still very skeptical. You know, I've reread my own book and thought, you know, this is interesting, you know, but I can't claim to know the absolute truth, you know. But at the same time, you know, I think a lot of people get this idea that because you can't prove it unequivocally, then therefore it's false. Right. Which is just, to me, the sloppiest form of thinking, you know. And to be a professional debunker, you know, my favorite kind of clown out there, it would presume that you are in possession of all knowledge, you know, and you speak every language, and you're, you know, not just smarter than every author that's, you know, written about this, but you're smarter than Plato, you're smarter than Francis Bacon, you know, both of whom believed in the reality of Atlantis. So it's like, I doubt that. I frankly doubt anybody alive today is, you know, categorically more intelligent than Plato or Francis Bacon. And yet these people make a kind of amateur career out of calling people like me or you or hundreds of other authors crazy for just looking at what actually was written and saying, hey, you know, these people have made quite an interesting point, and we should look at it for what it is, instead of just throwing it in the bin because we haven't found a circular capital city that says, welcome to Atlantis at the bottom of the ocean. Yes, which we will never probably find, you know?
That is the problem we face, but because of wonderful researchers like yourself and many others that are digging deep and relentlessly trying to uncover these truths, we're inching a little bit further towards academia with some of this information. Now, you mentioned that the reality of some aspects of Atlantis was comparable to Star Wars, and this is one of the areas that some people check out on and some people become more interested in, is how advanced was this civilization, and the possibilities that it could have been not only limited to certain areas, but possibly a global civilization?
It's a great question. And again, it requires a very long-winded, I'll try to keep it as short as I can, but, you know, a very nuanced answer, because if, let's say our civilization ended right now, and you, for practical purposes, call our civilization 8,000 years old.